Welcome to Beyond the Backyard, the Propane podcast where we explore the energy that fuels more than you think. From backyard grills to transportation, residential, commercial, and agricultural applications, we're diving into how propane powers everyday life. Whether you're a seasoned pro in the propane industry or curious about clean, safe, and reliable energy, this is your place for powerful insights and fresh perspectives. Each episode, we bring you the people, the technology, and the stories moving propane forward. You'll hear from industry leaders, problem solvers, and propane pros with fresh ideas that go far beyond the tank. Beyond the Backyard is powered by MOPERC, the Missouri Propane Education and Research Council. Now let's get started and go beyond the backyard with propane. So, Steve, why don't you introduce yourself and tell our audience a little bit about you?
Thanks, Molly. I appreciate you having me on your podcast. I actually work for Bluebird Corporation now, coming up on 2 years there. But I've been in the alternative energy and transportation space, if you will, for 20 years. So Bluebird has a lot more alternatives than anybody else. And so it was a really good fit for me to have a transition over to Bluebird. And it's been a great ride.
So much of your career has been focused on advancing alternative fuels in the transportation industry. What drew you to this field?
Necessity is the mother of all invention. Everybody's heard that before. And I was making a transition back in 2001 when I relocated my family across the country and kind of got out of the San Francisco high-tech portion of it. And an opportunity came up with this, and I jumped on it. I've always loved launching new technologies. I've done that in anti-counterfeiting and counterfeit deterrency and digital watermarking for internet access, things like that. And this whole, hey, using something other than gasoline or diesel in transportation, I think this sounds pretty interesting. And so we kind of dove into that. But I've done not just propane, but CNG, compressed natural gas, on the big Class 8 tractor trucks, trash trucks, and regional haul, and things like that, as well as LNG, liquefied natural gas, electric, hydrogen. And I ain't gonna lie, it's pretty clear what my favorite is in all of these, but they all have a place. Still trying to find the place for hydrogen, because I am a firm believer that you will never be environmentally sustainable until you are financially sustainable. And the hydrogen fuel sites at, about $10 million a pop isn't quite financially sustainable yet, but most of these have their place in a vehicle, in a duty cycle, and it's using the right energy in the right vehicle and duty cycle is what makes you a winner.
That makes sense. So having worked at PERC as an autogas business developer, and now at Bluebird, how has your perspective on the propane school bus market evolved?
Even my 6 years at the Propane Education and Research Council taught me that student transportation is a magnificent market for alternatives, all the alternatives, because you have a low duty cycle. You have the opportunity for fixed routes. You know exactly how far you need to go. All these vehicles come back basically to the same place, which is very key for infrastructure. So although I will admit, when I first started at PERC, I thought, the school bus industry for student transportation is well underway. Bluebird's got this, and Roush, the powertrain folks got this. I'll focus on other things. Well, I found out really quick that, we've done very well in student transportation, but we've only captured less than 10% of the market share. So there's so much more out there. And people ask all the time, well, what's the biggest obstacle to everybody doing this? And it's mostly awareness and human nature's resistance to change that everybody has, but it's mostly that awareness. And I just saw, we've got a lot more work to do. So jumping right into focusing just on student transportation at Bluebird allowed me to be very focused in pursuing that market and solving that problem of awareness.
So what do you see as the biggest changes in the school transportation industry over the past decade?
Diesel has been a powertrain dominant in student transportation. Of the 480,000 vehicles in operation in the student transportation delivering kids to and from school safely, diesel has 430,000 of those. So it's by far the most popular. Everybody understands it and they're very comfortable with it. But when it comes to the environmental aspects, especially of children climbing on and off a bus, and the most vulnerable of those children are the smaller ones, okay? And think about, those smaller ones, and that diesel exhaust pipe is right about at the height of the smallest, most vulnerable ones, and reducing the emissions on these vehicles in our communities is paramount for their safety and health. A lot of effort has been gone into providing alternatives to diesel that are clean. Basically, there are two alternatives to diesel that are clean, and that's electric and propane. And electric being what we'll call a zero emission, but propane, what we call a near zero emission. And a lot of people ask me, and I spend a lot of time educating people on this, what exactly is near zero emission? Everybody understands the term zero emission, at least at a tailpipe for an electric bus, but a propane bus is near zero. Now, everybody has to meet the EPA, and if you're in a CARB state, California Resource Board state, then you have to meet CARB standards for those emissions standards, okay? And as a manufacturer, and we are the only manufacturer, OEM, of propane vehicles, Bluebird's quite proud of that, but we have to meet those standards. So a diesel has to meet, and today is 0.2 grams of NOx, which is a toxic emission that contributes mostly to the respiratory illness in kids and things like that, has to meet the 0.2 grams of NOx per brake horsepower. Okay, so diesel does that, gasoline does that, propane does that, of course, electric does that. But when we say it's near zero with propane, how much reduction other than what's the EPA standard today is there? Well, West Virginia University students did a test. They took one of our new propane buses and one of our new diesel buses, same model year, and put them on the route. Now, EPA's regulations are dynamometer testing of these emissions. But in real world application, they put emission testing equipment on both of those and ran them through the same routes every day for 2 months. Do you know how much less toxic emissions the propane bus provided over the diesel bus?
Is it 96%?
You are dead on. Yes. So when we're talking about getting close to zero emissions, near zero emissions is this level of reduction in toxic emission. NOx and particulate matter are the two that contribute mostly to the environmental health of young lungs and adult lungs for that matter. So we're protecting not only our kids, but our bus drivers and the entire community that these propane buses operate in, because it reduces emissions by that much.
And when you say NOx, that is nitrogen oxide, correct?
Yes, it is. That's the one that's the hardest to reduce. Now, today's standard is 0.2 grams of NOx. And in 2027, that goes from 0.2 to 0.035, which is a very challenging regulation to meet as a original equipment, manufacturer of vehicles. And to do that costs a lot of money. So the diesel after treatment that we've been used to since 2007 with diesel exhaust fluid, the SCRs, EGRs, the particulate matter filters are all getting way more expensive and way more restricted in the next few years in 2027. So there's a huge push now to find ways of meeting those standards less expensively. And when you start with a cleaner fuel like propane, basically you don't have any particulate matter to filter out. So you don't have a particulate matter filter on there, which are thousands of dollars to replace. And you also have those reduction in NOx that we just talked about. So our propane buses today don't meet just the 0.2, not even the 2027 0.035, but we meet 0.02, which is the proposed standard for 2031. You're getting way ahead of the game when you go with propane out of the gate now.
Yeah, so it'd be less of an expense for when that time comes, when the regulation is reduced to 0.025 compared to those diesel buses.
Right, because we beat that 0.02 today without any after treatment systems other than a 3-way catalytic converter which is basically like what you have on your car. So there's no diesel exhaust fluid. There's no particulate matter filter. All those things don't exist on there. So you don't have to maintain them. You don't have to replace these things that don't exist on there to begin with. So propane out of the gate is less expensive.
Cool. So we've talked about the reduction in emissions between diesel and propane buses, but now can you explain how propane buses differ from traditional diesel models in terms of operation and performance?
Well, the operation we just kind of covered, it operates without all of that after treatment to meet those emission standards. So you don't have the higher maintenance. But as far as performance goes, we have diesel, which is a compression ignition engine. And our diesel engines also have a turbocharger on there. So when a driver gets in the bus, they're basically just mashing their foot down on the pedal to get that turbo to spin up and gradually get going. And spark ignited engine like propane has spark plugs in it to ignite it, has more of a better response on that accelerator. So we have to teach driver, hey, stop mashing that all the way down, because you get that instant response just like you do in your car, and it doesn't have a turbocharger that needs to ramp up to get that performance. So accelerating through an intersection or to an entrance ramp onto interstate and things like that, it performs very well. Propane is 106 octane compared to the 87 octane for gasoline. We tune them down just a bit so that they match all of our other bus experiences on the spark ignited side. So when drivers get into buses, they don't even know it's running on propane. They just know, there's a response in the accelerator that's a little bit different now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that, the operation side of that. So what are the primary benefits districts see when they switch to propane, economically and environmentally speaking?
Okay, I'll do the economically and environmentally, but I want to do one before that. That one of the benefits that was somewhat of an unintended consequence, but a very positive one. Propane buses are very quiet. Okay. Our electric buses are very quiet. And so you now have drivers that aren't shouting at the top of their lungs, over all the other noise in the bus, especially from a diesel engine, to communicate with students. They're hearing a lot more of the conversations that are going on in the back of the bus, good, bad, or indifferent there. But you have special needs kids on those buses. And I have a special needs son who's always had difficulty with loud noises, and how frustrating it is. So the IEPs for a lot of students require, if they're on this diesel bus, they have to have headphones on to protect them. And we have this one story with a school district in Illinois who had teachers going to their principals and asking, what's going on here? Because they're used to their students in an inclusive special needs class coming in, and it takes about 45 minutes for everybody to settle down and get going so they can start their teaching. And literally overnight, the whole class was coming in and they were calm and sitting down, and so they're trying to find out not just one or two students, the whole class. And so they spent almost a week trying to figure out what happened. And then the transportation director for the school buses, Diana Mikilski, terrific person, found out that they were, that was the day that we switched from their diesel bus to their propane bus. And kids were taking off their headphones. Drivers didn't have to shout, and they're coming off the bus and they're just as calm as can be. We've heard that over and over and over again, but it wasn't something that we intended to do. But in addition to that economic and environmental aspect, we now have the whole quietness benefit of what's going on that bus. We've talked a little bit about the environmental part of it, the reduction in toxic emissions, NOx especially, and particulate matter when we're doing this. But environmentally, getting back to that mantra I had for the last 20 years, you can never really be environmentally sustainable until you can be financially sustainable. And our propane buses are less than 10% in cost increases over our diesel buses. So it's a very small amount in capital to acquire this propane bus. But the savings, the financial savings in these buses are astounding. And that's something that most people don't realize because they always think immediately if it's an alternative that it's going to be way more expensive. But it's not. We are seeing on average about $3,700 a year in fuel cost savings per bus per year. So what does that really translate into? I do forensic case studies of our fleets, and we have a lot of them, who have transitioned from diesel to, or are in the process of transitioning from diesel to propane. And so I asked them, okay, how much did you spend on propane fuel last year? How much did you spend on diesel fuel last year? And how many miles did you go on diesel and how many miles did you go on propane? Which they have to track. Every school district has to track all the miles for each bus. So that's easy one for them to ask. Okay, so they look in their records, they look at how much they spent on diesel, how much they spent on propane, and then we get what's called a cost per mile. And depending on how much you're spending for diesel or how much you're spending for propane is always less expensive. But the cost per mile averages are about 27 cents a mile. So any school district that's out there and says, okay, well, we travel 100,000 miles, or we travel 1,000,000 miles, or we travel 2,000,000 miles. I have a school district I just did this case study on, and they didn't really know. They knew they were saving, but they didn't know exactly how much until we did this cost comparison. And they drive 2,000,000 miles. And they're saving, we're talking $500,000 a year that this school district's saving with their 200 bus fleet. So this starts to settle in. And now you have not just student transportation directors, but superintendents, school board members who have the fiduciary responsibility for their district's budget flocking to this and saying, is this for real? And then they talk to their other superintendents at other places, and that's how this grows.
Wow. Yeah, I had to write that down. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a lot. I love interviewing folks in the national conferences, and I'll moderate panels and have them tell their stories, and they get out there. We can always project what it might be, and we have pretty good calculators for doing that. But when you can go back and forensically take exactly what happened, those aren't arguable. That's fact. That's for real.
So, can you tell us how many school districts across the country have made the switch to propane buses?
We have not just school districts, but contractors too for school districts. There's a lot of states that use independent contractors who use their buses and sometimes even their drivers and everything else to coordinate with schools to move that. So between districts and contractors, we're getting right close to 1,200 that are operating buses on propane.
So, how do propane buses perform in cold weather, and what's been the feedback from drivers and mechanics?
Drivers like the propane buses, especially in the cold weather states. The old propane carbureted systems of 30 years ago are not what we're doing today. With our liquid injection systems, and that fuel atomizes right in the combustion chamber. So we're pumping liquid in there to make that happen. Got a little competition going on YouTube. We have drivers and transportation directors, going out at 0 degrees outside or minus 20 degrees outside and starting their propane buses up. But the one I think is topping the scales right now is in Minnesota, where a rather skeptical person, I won't name names here, went out in minus 41 degrees. And in this minus 41 degrees, the bus, this is a Monday morning after a long weekend of sitting in these, extremely cold temperatures without block heaters or anything like that, went into the bus and started it right up. And I love the line that he says at the end, I wouldn't have believed this if I hadn't seen it myself. But it's not just the starting of the buses, Molly. It's how quick the cabins come up to temperature. Bus drivers need to do a pre-check, so, they go in, start the bus, and they go around the bus, and they're doing pre-check. They're testing everything, every single time they get in the bus. And usually on these super cold days, anything, 0 or even, 5, 10 degrees or whatever, it takes almost the entire route in the morning for that bus cabin temperature to warm up. But with these propane buses, in 12 or 15 minutes, by the time they finish their pre-check, they're taking off their coats and putting their seatbelts on and going out of the bus yard to pick up these kids. And getting back to the advantages of special needs, when we have wheelchair lifts that are on these buses, those doors come open, come down, and it takes a good, few minutes for kids to get loaded on in wheelchairs and secured and that door to come back up, and you've lost all your heat. But with a propane bus, you're back to that normal temperature very quickly. And so drivers, once they get a taste of that, they don't want to go back.
Yeah, it's nice to be warm, especially in the negative 40 or however much degree weather that farther you get up north, the colder it is.
Well, I'm from Alaska. Okay. So our national park up there, Denali National Park, has been operating propane buses for over a decade now, our Bluebird buses, because you can't drive inside the park. You have to park your car at the gate and basically ride a bus anywhere in the park that you want to go. And these are propane powered buses in the middle of Alaska.
That's cool. Over a decade.
Well, think about it. I mean, it's really hard to get electricity into these remote areas, but they have propane everywhere.
Yep.
It's in all the park ranger stations. So it's already there. And so it's easy for them to make the transition. They wanted quieter. They wanted cleaner in the national park. So it was a perfect fit for them. Oh, and by the way, these propane buses are equipped with enough fuel to go over 400 miles. They can do the distance.
Speaking of fuel, what kind of infrastructure is required to support propane buses, and how difficult is it for a district to make that transition?
There's 4 options of energizing this bus with propane. You have mobile fuel trucks. Everybody's seen a propane fuel truck before. It's holding 3,000 to 4,000 gallons in a barrel, and it's going out to every remote nook and cranny in every county in these United States. And they've been doing this for a long time. So you can go straight from one of those trucks into a bus. The city of Boston has 500 propane powered buses, and they don't have 1 square inch for infrastructure on energizing anything, whether it's diesel, propane, you name it. So when they were doing diesel, before they were doing propane, they had a diesel fuel truck come in and fuel all of those trucks overnight. So when they switched to propane, they did the same thing. So the mobile truck comes in, fills them all up, and you go on your way. Now, a little bit more economical is the less labor intensive of that. And that is you can have a portable system. It's usually on a trailer. You have a propane tank, you have a propane powered engine that runs the pump, and you can set this up in a parking lot with the crash barriers up, and literally anywhere you can fuel propane buses. This happens sometimes if a district is moving to a new site and they don't have the infrastructure up, but they already have their buses. And so a provider of propane, the suppliers there, will provide this mobile unit that you can pick up and move. But everybody wants to get to their own infrastructure at their own place in their own bus yard. And that's where propane shines. We're a manufacturer. We build 4 different options of powertrains, the electric, the propane, the gasoline, and the diesel. But of all of those, propane is the least expensive, including gasoline and diesel, of any infrastructure that's out there. And one of those is mostly because of the risk that needs to be mitigated for gasoline and diesel to spill. You have these underground tanks. We just talked to a lot of school districts who've had to overcome leakage from those diesel tanks underground, and it's very expensive. We're talking millions of dollars in reclamation and cleanup. But this propane fuel station can't leak. I mean, it can't contaminate the soil or the water because it immediately evaporates. If it gets outside of the vessel, and we don't want any propane getting outside of vessels, but if it does, it evaporates. It's non-carcinogenic. It's not a greenhouse gas. And so the EPA doesn't even regulate a propane infrastructure site. Now, authorities having jurisdiction and safety, fire marshals, and so of course they will regulate those, but the EPA doesn't see it as a threat at all to the environment. So it's very inexpensive to set up a propane fueling station. And it's very scalable. So you start off with 5 buses, you put a 1,000-gallon tank, you put a pump and a motor on there. The pump only takes a clothes dryer outlet, a 220, 30 amp circuit, and it pumps 10 gallons a minute, 24 hours a day. So you can fill up just as fast as you would with gasoline or diesel and get that range and, get drivers in and out and down the way. And of course, it has the fuel management systems on there too, to monitor how much fuel is going into each bus and who's doing what. So it's the infrastructure is what sets propane apart from any other energy source because it is the least expensive and the easiest one to set up.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Oh, and here's the other thing. If you ask propane providers nicely, they'll give you one of these things at no cost. It happens all the time. Now, nothing's for free, but what they'll do is they'll take the capital cost of that fuel station It comes in on a skid with a pump and everything else. Basically, the district just brings up, electricity to it, and they'll take that cost and they'll put a few pennies on top of the gallons that they sell the school district in their contract, and so that they don't have to pay for it, and they don't have to pay for maintaining it because the propane provider will maintain it as well.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely a benefit there.
Yeah, it is.
So let's move on to safety, which is a top concern for parents in schools. How do propane buses compare to diesel when it comes to safety standards and performance?
All of our buses, regardless of the powertrain and the energy that's in there, have to meet the FMVS at the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards for school buses. Okay. That includes all of the crash testing that has to happen to make sure that they're safe, even if they get hit, broadside, in an intersection. All of these things have to be done for all of our powertrains. So there's nothing different for any one of those. Okay. But our propane tanks are actually made out of steel, and that's almost quarter-inch steel in these tanks, and they're in between the frame rails, okay, with another V barrier to deviate that impact. And so they are extremely safe when it comes to it. And if there was ever a fire, and there have been fires on buses, electrical or brake, things that would cause a fire, the propane tank has, like your water heater at home, a pressure relief valve. So if the temperature gets too hot, it doesn't do an explosion. It would just open up that pressure relief valve and let the gas exit on the non-door side of a bus, so that when kids are exiting off of a bus in an emergency, it'd be in the opposite direction. Now, we don't have too many of those incidents, thankfully, because the buses that we've seen actually in fires haven't had that happen. In other words, propane is a refrigerant, and so it has a cooling factor in it. So during this fire or any kind of thermal event, we're very safe on a propane bus. And meeting all of those federal standards is part of making this happen. Our job at Bluebird is paramount to safely moving kids to and from school in a safe and clean environment. And propane leads the way with meeting both of those.
So, what are the maintenance advantages of propane buses? And are there measurable savings or reliability improvements?
The things on the propane bus isn't what's impressive. It's the things that are not on the propane bus that are impressive. So when we're doing a ride and drive show and tell, if you will, with a district that's exploring options, we'll bring a propane bus and we'll bring it into the maintenance facility and lift it up. And what I love watching is the mechanics that come in, they're looking and go, well, where's the, it's not what's there, it's what's not there. That makes the maintenance on it and the uptime so much better. That's where it is. The exhaust treatment stuff to meet all those regulations isn't there. So they get to focus on the other parts of the bus to keep those things maintained. As far as documented, Anthony Jackson down in Bibb County, Georgia, we did that forensic, fuel cost savings. And I said, well, Anthony, let's do your maintenance cost saving. Oh yeah, let's do the maintenance cost saving. So, we had the same time frame, for 1 year, same number of miles on the propane diesel buses. So he added up all the money he spent on the diesel buses and all the money he spent maintaining the propane buses. It was another 23 cents a gallon. It's 23 cents a mile. So he had the 27 cents a mile on fuel costs, but another 23 cents a mile on those maintenance cost savings, which is pretty much the average, in any of these case studies that I do. And so now you're up to 50 cents a mile in savings. And he's driving 2 million miles, Molly. Carry the one. I mean, that's $1 million a year for the school district. That's some serious money. That's a lot of teachers' salary, a lot of classroom, savings. And for the communities, fiduciary responsibilities for taxpayers, school board members really like this.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about the savings that propane buses in themselves provide for school districts. So what about funding? Are there any state or federal programs that are currently available to help school districts transition to propane buses?
Okay, well, I'd like to start off at the beginning that unless you can be financially sustainable with something, then it's basically pretty much a science project. But we're seeing fleets that have transitioned to propane grow every time. In other words, it start with a few and then they go all the way through until they're 100%. Now, I've got lots of fleets from coast to coast now that are 100% propane. That doesn't happen unless this is financially sustainable. But having said all that, you can do this without grants all the time. I love one of the districts I talked to, and I had interviewing myself. And he was talking about the funding that he got from the Clean School Bus, EPA's Clean School Bus program. He got 180 electric buses. You know, these things are expensive buses. And then we immediately transitioned to the question that you're asking. We were talking about, he just ordered another 50 of our propane buses. I said, great. Well, what funding did you use for that? He goes, oh, we don't need funding for that. Those things pay for themselves. So all of that to say, this doesn't require grant funding for you to go to propane buses. Okay. Now, do we help school districts get money that's out there? Absolutely. And because propane is so clean, it qualifies for all of these funding opportunities as well. So on the federal side, the EPA Clean School Bus funding, it's electric and propane buses that qualify. But there's also, like in Missouri, you have the EPA grant funding. And I believe East Prairie actually took advantage of winning one of those for their propane bus. Then you also have the DESE. And I think that's the Department of Elementary Secondary Education in your state. And then you have folks like Grain Valley and have Hannibal that have taken advantage of the DESE. And I think that's open now. That's $50,000 a bus. Now, if it's there, we help people take advantage of it. Okay. I just don't want people thinking that they have to have this in order to do propane, but we'll help that. And then I think your organization actually does a little bit too. So why don't you tell us what MOPR does to help incentivize propane powered bus?
Yeah, so MOPR does have autogas rebates available for school districts and fleets, pretty much any vehicle that can operate on autogas like fleets, lawnmowers, the school buses. There's autogas rebates available for any of those.
We have three options right there in the state of Missouri. You can get the federal monies from EPA, the DESE opportunity, which is not too shabby. I mean, $50,000 a bus. What it allows you to do is do more of them. Instead of, 2 or 3, you get, 4 or 5 because of that funding opportunity. And then it just gets you further down the road in replacing your diesel buses. Oh, speaking of replacing diesel buses, I got to brag on my Bluebird company here. We are now at 60% of our buses made are not diesel. 60% of our buses now are not diesel. Quite proud of that one.
That is something to be very proud of. So for smaller and rural districts, what's the best starting point to explore funding or technical assistance?
Starting off with contacting your Bluebird dealer. Our dealer network is the best that's out there. They have the longest longevity of being a dealer because they do things so well. So the dealer can provide a lot of information. We go out to dealers all the time, but whether you're rural or suburban or even inner city, we've got the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania now that ordered their propane buses, and it's not geographically restrictive. But in rural areas, you have some interesting challenges. Those challenges are, hey, how am I going to be able to go this far? So I have folks reach out to other rural districts and say, hey, you can listen to me. I can give you some information. But what really means something is one of your peers that can tell you, okay, this is how it went and so forth. Kay Cornelius in Upper Minnesota, she was pretty much not interested in propane. But after she tried it, she is now 100% propane. Now, when we're talking rural, Kay's district is 4,200 square miles, mostly dirt and gravel. So she is now 100% of her fleet is operating on propane. She actually gets over 500 miles of range out of her buses because she's not doing stops very often. A field trip for her robotics classes that are very competitive on the national scale. So she drives 1,200 miles with her robotics team on her propane buses down to Southern Illinois and back. And she does it with her propane buses. And the reason why we can do this is we transport all of our buses from our manufacturing facility in Fort Valley, Georgia. We drive them to all of our destinations across North America, all the provinces in Canada as well. These buses drive there because the propane industry has such a great network of public refueling stations as well. And yes, there's an app for that. Department of Energy has the All Fuel Station Locator app, and you can plot out your course and, go to all these 2,700 facilities in the United States. And that's how we drive. We drive our propane buses to all of customer sites. So it's not just rural. It covers all the bases.
You're not going to get stuck without auto gas. So are there any examples of Missouri districts that have successfully leveraged these programs to expand their propane fleets?
I think we hit on most of them. Grain Valley, Liberty, Independence, Hannibal, East Prairie just got started. Richland, Lebanon. There's quite a few in your footprint there in Missouri. So y'all should be very pleased with making that happen.
Yep, and we're continuously trying to make more school districts aware of the benefits of propane so they can have the opportunity to transition their fleets as well. Are there any innovations or advancements in propane technology that are on the horizon for school transportation?
There are some things that are brewing. People would ask me all the time, and I say, don't hold your breath for that one, that kind of thing, especially since we have a propane solution for our Type A buses, which are the small shuttle buses, and then the Type C bus, which is the conventional bus that you're typically seeing with the nose out in front. But then there's also other platforms of buses that might just see some options coming up in the next few years. I won't say don't hold your breath, but we're always innovating. We're always making things better, and we're always expanding things that work. And because things work so well with propane, you can imagine there might be some other platforms coming up.
Definitely have to keep an eye out for that.
Keep an eye out for that, Molly.
Well, I'm excited. How can MOPERC continue to support the growth of propane-powered school buses?
Your organization represents an industry that, they have the best job in the whole world, I think, second to selling school buses, which we need to do. But you're working with a domestic energy source that the United States has more propane than any other country in the world. And your members get to provide that domestic energy, which is clean, which is very inexpensive. As a school district, you can lock in a particular fuel contract and know exactly what your costs are going to be for the next year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. So having your members approach their school districts, because your members are a lot of family-oriented businesses, they're in every single community in your state. So if MOCR can help their propane marketers approach their school, because somebody at their organization knows somebody on a school board, knows a superintendent, and just get the conversation started. Say, hey, is there some reason why we're not doing propane buses in our community now? And say, they can provide the energy and the infrastructure, and we can provide the equipment with those buses to make that happen. But there's a lot of learning that has to take place. So I do school board presentations all the time. I sit down in superintendent's offices and explain the whole overview of what it looks like to have propane buses. And it's that education part that you do, that we do, and your marketers can help us connect with the right people in their school district to get the conversation started.
Hopefully that's something that this podcast can also accomplish for that.
Yo.
So what's one myth or misconception about propane buses that you'd like to set straight?
A lot of times you kind of want to go to the safety part of it, but I think everybody understands how safe propane's. We have 25,000 propane buses on the road today here in the United States. I think we've demonstrated the safety of that. So I'll go on to the myth that because it's an alternative, it's clean and it's an alternative, that it must be more expensive. And some of the other alternatives that I've worked with in the past, LNG and CNG and hydrogen, even electric infrastructure, is very challenging. Now, we can build a bus on any energy source, but if you can't get that energy source in there in a cost-effective way, then, it kind of stunts the growth. So we're always working on ways of infrastructure costs coming down. Well, the myth that I'd like to dispel is propane is an alternative. It's clean. But the myth is that it's more expensive on that infrastructure, and it's not. And when people realize that and say, oh, I can step into this, I can make this happen. And with your members' support, bringing that infrastructure in and providing that fuel, it happens real quick.
Right. That is definitely one of the big misconceptions of the end user nowadays. So what's your favorite thing about propane?
Oh, my. I'm hopeless here. I love going out on the back deck, and I love turning on my propane grill. I know you probably cook your ribeyes and steaks. I just do my hamburgers and hot dogs, and I just love how that works. But to be able to take that same fuel that's so clean that we let it touch our food, I get to put that in a bus that provides a super clean environment for the most precious cargo on the planet. That's my favorite thing about propane.
That's very valid. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience that might interest or inspire them?
Just that Bluebird is here to help your Mopert members with conveying that value proposition of propane to their school districts. And we're here to help school districts understand what it takes to make this transition and what are those benefits going to be. And there's not one place in the United States, including any place in Missouri, where we can't provide a peer to that school district of what they've done and they're nearby. So if there's a way that we can help connect the dots for folks to do this exploration and transitioning from diesel into a cleaner environment for student transportation, we're here to help.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve. I certainly learned a lot from talking with you about propane autogas and the benefits of using that in buses around the nation. I definitely came away with probably a handful of things that I've learned. So hopefully our listeners also can take away a few key points. So yeah, thanks for sitting down and talking with me.
Molly, thanks for putting this together. I'm really glad Beyond the Backyard is in your wheelhouse there for making that happen. And I'm honored to be asked to be on your podcast. So let me know when we can do this again.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Backyard, the Propane podcast. This episode is complete. For show notes and additional information on the benefits and uses of propane, visit propanemissouri.com. You'll also find interesting case studies and valuable propane safety information. Have a great day and remember to listen to our next episode of Beyond the Backyard to hear about the people, the technology, and the stories moving propane forward.